Hello, welcome along to the home ground. David Bashir with Max Schiffman. Max, we're not in our normal studio, we're on location.
We are.
Where are we?
Well, at the Mission Redevelopment, here today with our special guest, Ameet Bains.
Ameet, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Max. Looking forward to our chat.
Tell us about your journey in sports administration. Obviously, you're a qualified lawyer, a regulatory lawyer, and you've had experience at St Kilda, in corporate with Toyota. So tell us about what led you to this point in your career.
Yeah. Look, I've always had a love of sport from a young age. I grew up in Bendigo in country Victoria, and in those simpler times, sport was such a huge part of who you were and the community. So I think deep down I've always fostered an ambition to be involved in sport, and like many kids or most kids, when you realise your ambitions of actually playing at a professional level are extinguished, you look for the next best thing. So for me, I was fortunate to start to get some of that sporting experience when I worked as an in-house lawyer at Toyota Australia. Toyota was and still is the major partner of a lot of different sporting bodies, teams, individuals, entertainment as well. And through that time, I was fortunate enough to work on some big deals, including negotiating the AFL sponsorship contract as one example, and got to know a lot of people around the industry, and was fortunate enough then to get an opportunity at the Saints in late 2010, I should say, and started just in the new year in 2011. Now going into my 16th year in the AFL industry.
Amazing. And so you've been the CEO of the Western Bulldogs since 2017. How has the club, how's the business of the club evolved and changed over that time?
Yeah, it's I think the real period of evolution started before I arrived, and a lot of great work done by a lot of key people from our board and executive at the time. So I was fortunate to come in at a point where I suppose a lot of heavy lifting had been done, and I've seen it as my job as a leader with obviously a lot of people around me to take the club to the next step in its journey, which a lot of it for our club and for Bulldogs supporters is around security and financial sustainability, because as a club we have had times in our past where there was an existential threat to us being around. You go back to 1989 when the then VFL sought to merge the club with Fitzroy, and through the efforts of a lot of wonderful people, Peter Gordon came to the presidency at that time, Irene Chatfield, who was the poster lady of the hour, really rallied the community to raise money to save the club. And if I touch on that for a moment, we as football clubs talk about how integral community is and our fans are, and that was a really profound example of the club not existing but for our community and fans rallying around the club. And then even in the mid-90s, when David Smorgan came in and led a further rallying of the club, doing things like changing the name to the Western Bulldogs with his board and executive to broaden the appeal of the club and take it on a new journey. There's been a lot that's happened. So, for our leadership and our regime, it's been more about building on that foundation and trying to take the club forward. So a lot of that for us can be measured in things like membership growth and the privilege of sitting in a facility like we are today at Mission Whitten Oval, all the while trying to get that on-field success, obviously, which is what we all strive for.
And the redevelopment of Mission Whitten Oval, I think over 70 million, finished in 2024. What has that meant for your business plan as a club, but also sprouting wings in the way you want in the community? Has it sort of got a multi-purpose meaning?
Yeah, it has. And I think the thing that we were most driven by as a club was to ensure that we stayed at our home. So this has been our home base for over 140 years. So that connection to the community and our part within it has been, an inherent part of who we are and something that we wanted to protect. Different clubs through circumstances have had to move around and have unfortunately lost a bit of that connection or have, temporarily departed and then come back. So for us, maintaining that has been critical. I think what the development has allowed, though, in delivering a world-leading a world-class facility, I should say, is a place that, gives our people the best chance of succeeding, whether it's obviously the athletes in the first instance, or whether it's the staff. Just coming to work in a place that you don't want for anything is great. I think as a place that attracts a lot of the community here as well, having a space that's not only welcoming but does offer a lot of different amenities beyond being a football club is also important too.
Yeah, so how did you go about balancing the need for those elite facilities that you have on the site with maintaining that community link and access? And how do you measure the return on investment for stuff that isn't necessarily revenue generating?
Yeah, it's a great question. The return can be measured in some ways, I suppose, when it comes to visitation and the commercialisation of the site, but a lot of it for us is intangible. It is about the cultural advancements that you get. In a football sense, I think one of the greatest things that we've been able to achieve that only comes from having a new facility where you obviously get to draw up plans and directives that allow for it to happen, but the integration of our men's and women's program is a great example of that. So building things from scratch has allowed us to create equal facilities and provide access for both of our programs to avail themselves of what we have. But what we were also able to do, and full credit to both programs for thinking this way, is structure our seating plans a bit differently. So rather than having all of our AFL women's program in one part of the football building and the men's in the other, what the guys led and have engineered is coexistence by speciality. So you've got high performance and medical, but it's a men's and women's program, football administration and operations, but it's a men's and women's list management, coaching and so on. So that's led to a lot of natural integration as well. So some of those cultural elements are things that are hard to measure. I mean, you do engagement surveys, obviously, and you ask some pointed questions about how people are getting on and working together. But I think some of those things are harder to measure. And I think the balance was hard, but also easy to strike. Again, our club has been such a huge part of this community for so long that it was a temporary period where we couldn't have people here with the cafe not being available and the place being a work site. But it was just a natural thing to want to have people back. So an upgrade to the cafe, more open plan arrangements around the foyer, the introduction of a museum and a walkway that people could go down and immerse themselves in our history. Things like that were at the forefront of our thinking. But none of which compromise the football element, I suppose, which is, the core part of what we do day to day.
And the development of your strategy out west, not just the west of Melbourne, but the west of Victoria, you've got a clear vision of what you want to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the Ballarat arrangements were put in place before I started. But again, the foresight of those who were in charge at the time, seeing that as obviously a developing area and an opportunity for us to grow our profile and I suppose not just have the west of Melbourne as our homeland, but also Western Victoria. So the Ballarat partnership is a key strategic partnership of ours, and we're a decade into that now, which at its core has, or at maybe not its core, but as the highlight has 2 AFL men's games and 1 AFL women's game a year. But it also has the club on the ground in Ballarat with staff, with officers, and a 365-day a year impact, particularly around some of the community programs we run as well. But strategically, I think the challenge is growing your fan base over time. And, there's also a really changing face of Australia and where that population growth is being driven by. And it's a cohort that don't have a connection with our game, given it's native to Australia. So we need to think differently about how we try and engage that crowd.
And is that partly because you grew up in Bendigo, so you understand regional Victoria, you understand the mentality of community in those regions? Do you think you've got an advantage in expanding in that respect?
I think I've got a natural mindset that gravitates towards that. Like growing up in Bendigo, I knew and I felt how important sport was, not just in the local community, but when proper sport, big sport, came to town. When I grew up, the touring test team used to play a 4-day game against Victoria at the QEO in Bendigo. there was always a pre-season game, AFL game that was played on the QEO. And as a young kid who loves sport, you live for those moments and you know how much it meant to everyone in the local community. So there's a part of that for me that, what we do in Ballarat matters and makes a huge difference, because whether it's for practical reasons or financial reasons, not everyone can get to Melbourne for sport. So there's a huge part of that resonates with me.
Yeah, and you touched on the growth of the West more broadly, and if we bring it back into the Melbourne growth areas, the West is actually the fastest growing region in the country, with a lot of people that are coming from other parts of the world, particularly the Indian subcontinent. So what are you doing to engage with those communities as they emerge?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's another cohort that resonates with me. I was born and brought up here, but my parents are Indian migrants from the 70s. So there's a lot that we want to do, and there's a lot that we will do. And I think even from an AFL perspective, you would have seen recently that the AFL CEO, Andrew Dillon, and their head of strategy on the executive team, Walter Lee, travelled to India as well to better understand, I think, aspects of the Indian community and what makes people tick, on an individual level, but a business level when they're in India, and to bring back some of those learnings for how we can better engage the Indian community here. So it is a big piece of what we want to do. And I think for us, if you look at that growing demographic, the city of Wyndham is where a lot of that population growth is coming from. The city of Wyndham is our number one membership LGA in the country, and Werribee is our number one membership postcode in the country. So for us to maintain that connection to the West and that cohort, we need to get on top of that community.
Do you ever see us shipping out a game to Mumbai or something during the regular season?
I think it's a possibility, but not an immediate one. I think that the biggest challenge here is to really connect with the local population, which is something that we all need to do. And I think the way we need to do it, coming back to another part of your question, is we need to think differently about it as well. As an industry, and maybe not just the AFL, maybe industries across the country have fallen into the trap, as we have as a club, of targeting the multicultural community, but doing it at that broad level when clearly each different cohort within it needs to be marketed to, spoken to, engaged in a unique way. So I think even being more mindful of that and understanding that the effort that you need to put in to tailor things to people takes a lot longer, costs more money, but is more beneficial in the long run, is something that we all now acknowledge we need to do.
And is that part of the reason for the membership growth and your commercial improvement as a club? Is that really you've tapped into that cohort as a commercial imperative, obviously a community imperative as well, but how's that impacted on the bottom line, and what other levers can you pull in that respect?
Yeah, it's a good question. We haven't tapped into it enough. So the growth has come off the back of doing a better job of converting our existing fans and members. And whilst, in the last 10 or 11 years, we've only won the one premiership. We lost the 2021 grand final. We have been a team that has been reasonably successful on field, and I think that's what's driven some of the other growth. Some of the metrics for us around, use sponsorship as an example, but Mission, which sits on the front of our AFL jumper, was again the number one brand in the AFL out of all brands that clubs have across the competition. So I think our on-field growth and success, notwithstanding we haven't got exactly where we wanted to over that period, has driven a lot of that. And where that flows into is also, with broadcasting, for example. So we've been fortunate to have a lot of Thursday night games, Friday night games, primetime games that obviously enhance your brand by putting it in the time slots where most people are watching, but also then has that halo effect of other partners and others wanting to come on board as well.
Max, at this point, do you feel like you need a little bit of the Bulldogs in the Saints some makeup?
Oh, yeah, quite possibly. I mean, certainly some of the things they've achieved here at the Mission with Novel, I'll use the full name, has, are things that I think some of the other clubs could learn from. And it's probably a good segue to what I also wanted to ask, which is around, that investment piece, particularly the partnership with government, because a lot of the time, you find that these sorts of levels of infrastructure investment require some level of government intervention or assistance, and that's certainly been the case here. So, how do you think, how important do you think it is, that partnership with, government at federal and state level particularly, but also how do you go about making the case for that public investment?
Yeah, it's absolutely critical. We couldn't have constructed what we have here without government funding. So, for your listeners to round that out, give or take out of $78 million, final cost here, 61 was government. But interestingly, it was both sides of government at different levels. So the majority of that came from the Victorian Labor government, but there's also a significant contribution that came from the then Morrison government and Josh Frydenberg's budget, which seems counterintuitive in a part of the world where the Liberal Party is unlikely to win a seat. But I think the partnership element of what you referenced, Max, is something that for us comes from a history, and I'm talking decades now, of community good and community impact. And that's what really resonates with people. And I think for us, that's what still drives us a lot. So, we all get caught up emotionally in the wins and losses, and none more so than our fans and members. But the impact that our community foundation in particular makes, and the track record around that, including the funding that we've received across 3 levels of government, so local government included, is a huge part of that. And that's not only something that's been going for a long time, but the scope of that, all the work that our foundation does is quite broad as well. We essentially work in 17 LGAs from the city of Maribyrnong here right through to the South Australian border. Every council that we work with is a funding partner, but at different times the state and federal governments, including both sides of politics, have helped fund those programs because there's significant impact that we're making that a sporting club by virtue of its brand and profile gets to make. So going back to your original question, the partnerships are critical. In terms of the justification for here, this site has always been a significant community-based site. So ensuring that it remained that way, and in fact enhancing the offerings here, which includes for our community foundation now purpose-built and tailored spaces where those programs can run on site, has been a big part of it. And I think the other part that gets forgotten a lot when debates are had about the cost-benefit analysis of the AFLW competition is providing access for female athletes. And we have not only our AFLW team that trains and plays here, but our VFLW. That's made a profound impact as well in obviously justifying the investment from government.
And that breadth of partnership, that's staggering. It's all the way to the border. So on the basis of that, in the next 5 to 10 years, where's the next infrastructure move for the Western Bulldogs? And what are your commercial aims in that period?
Great question as well. It's twofold. So the future planning and the future proofing will involve us completing an updated master plan for the precinct. So there are elements of this site that weren't touched during the most recent redevelopment, including land that the club owns at the southern end of the precinct, which is adjacent to West Footscray Station. It's obviously very topical at the moment. High-rise housing
is one of the activity centres.
Yeah, well, we're not currently, but the possibilities of that parcel of land, as I said, adjacent to West Footscray Station. It, as the station was upgraded a number of years ago, but now sits within the new Metro Tunnel train line out to Sunbury. Once Suburban Rail Loop, if and when it comes through, it'll be a station on that line as well. So there are possibilities with what we might do there. With respect to the here and now, we've had 12 months or so of full operation on this site. So the real challenge is to ensure that it's fully optimised, not just from a commercial perspective, and there are different elements here on site that give rise to that, but also from a community and fan perspective as well.
Is it, I suppose from a spiritual point of view, I know away from the business, when I think of Ted Whitten, I just think of unbridled passion, right? So how do you bottle what was, he's an iconic figure in your club and the history of the game, but into the the consciousness of the club right now?
Well, I think, and I know I keep using the term community, but it is such an integral part of who we are. And you can see it even just having lunch today with one of our team. It's a training day, so a lot of people that come in and watch training and then have lunch in the cafe. But our players will, every day they're here, go and get a coffee and do things like that. And you watch them, whether it's Marcus Bontempelli or player 42 on the list, and they will stop, they'll have a chat. If someone wants a photograph, they take it. And I don't think those things can be taken for granted. Again, if I transport myself to being a 10-year-old in Bendigo, you never got those opportunities. And to have someone that you idolise stop and have a chat, even if it's for 30 seconds, it means a lot. And I think that keeps it front of mind, the passion and engagement. And I think that's the ongoing challenge for us as sports, and whether it's new population growth driven by people coming from outside the country, or whether it's kids like my kids whose attention spans have dramatically reduced from the time we were children. We've got to think differently about how we engage, but those moments where you can really capture the hearts of people, they're priceless.
And do you see from a commercial perspective that clubs are going to have to maybe change their business model over time as well? I mean, you touched on the fact that you said it here. I'm gonna paraphrase you. Property development for the Western Bulldogs. But are there other business sectors you think that are natural adjuncts to what the footy clubs do already that could potentially be part of that future investment pipeline? Like I noticed, for example, you've got Victoria University here with the High Performance Centre, but you've got education, you've got healthcare, you've got hospitality. You're sort of touching in a lot of those areas. But do you see that expanding over time?
Absolutely. And I think it's necessary for clubs to survive. I think forever and a day we've all been trying to break the nexus between commercial health and on-field success, particularly in the men's program. And no one's done that successfully. I think some clubs are better insulated to protect themselves from poor on-field performance, but no one's really been able to do that. So we're all searching for it. Things like education partners. Again, we've been one who's fortunate to have had Victoria University on board for a long time. So it's been a natural evolution of that into more joint ventures that are commercial. But everyone's got one now, in a sense. So the need to expand, and as you've said, our greatest revenue generating asset on site now is a function centre on the top level of the Witten stand. Circa 400 people stand up, cocktail function. We partner with Showtime Group, who are terrific partners who manage, I think, 7 or 8 sites around Melbourne, but bringing in their expertise, but building infrastructure like that allows for commercialisation that, it doesn't matter whether you win or lose on a Saturday, the venue will be booked regardless, becomes important. The other foray that we've gone into for the first time properly as a partner is childcare, which is obviously quite topical, so you've got to navigate sensitively given some of the really sad challenges that emerged last year. But we've partnered with a really reputable provider, Bains, who partnered with the Gold Coast Suns originally. But we've opened up a co-branded site with them in the new Footscray Hospital. So that's been a source of pride. A few of us were fortunate enough to go and have a wander around Footscray Hospital just before it opened. It's a pretty amazing facility, but to have a childcare site that's Bulldogs branded with Cool Beans there was pretty amazing too.
And that stadium, the use of the stadium, obviously primarily for AFL. You've touched on A-League. There's been A-League here and baseball as well. Is a further redevelopment of Mission Witten Oval going to see the stadium used for different types of events?
Yeah, well, that's as you've stated. There have been other sports that have been played here. I think the challenge that's arisen over the last 3 or 4 years has been the growth of football, full stop. We have 4 teams that train here: AFL, AFLW, VFL, VFLW. 3 of the 4 play games here. So the time in which the oval's actually free for other sports, and or the time that you need to bump in another sport and bump out another sport actually makes it difficult. But we would like to do more on site because it is a great asset. I think where we've seen more growth has been in our code. So we have hosted over the last couple of years non-Bulldogs AFLW games, non-Bulldogs VFL games. So, you know, from an AFL headquarters perspective, it is seen as a premium suburban venue that, you know, offers a great experience, not only for those that are here, but on a broadcast on a Saturday night or Friday night as well. So I think that's where the current growth is. But looking at other ways to use the facility, you know, we had a Diwali festival here late last year. We ran an African festival as well here. So it's looking at how we do some of those things, not just sports orientated as well.
Well, Max, it's been a fascinating chat, hasn't it? I wouldn't be surprised if Ameet's running a global sport sometime down the track.
Who knows? Well, he'd have to give up his wonderful AFL seat to do that. But yeah, absolutely great forward thinking and thinking for today as well about how the club operates. Thank you, Ameet.
Yeah, thanks, Ameet, for joining us.
No, thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure. Ameet Bains with us on the home ground.